Okay, great. Do you guys need to say anything up front?
No.
Okay. All right, well, thank you again. We're gonna focus our attention now on Pigeon Point. And so Mark Epstein is here to give us an overview of the current state of Pigeon Point, and then sort of where the guideway will go and some restoration of Pigeon Point. So Mark, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and I'm assuming I'm running the slides, so I'll try to follow your lead.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay now?
Hold on, Mark. You're pretty quiet. If you can come, I don't know, closer to your mic. And then I don't know if we can turn up the volume in here.
Sure.
Is that any better?
And barely. It's very muffled.
It's muffled.
Mark, if you take a look on your end at your audio controls, there may be a slider that allows you to increase the volume on your end as well.
Yeah.
It should be microphone volume.
There we go. Is that any better?
Yeah.
That is better.
Yes.
Okay. We're still good? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Thanks, Julia. Again, my role with Sound Transit is principal landscape architect. So I'm going to walk you through some of the restoration concepts for Pigeon Point. Next slide.
That was me. I am so sorry.
That you hit.
Oh, I think
Presentation muted, maybe.
I'm gonna actually jump out of the meeting and go back in because I accidentally had stopped and started and rejoined with the audio on, so I apologize.
Would it be helpful to share my screen?
Sure, if you want to share it and it works, that sounds great.
Okay. Let's go to the view. Let's see here. I won't be able to see you, but then we can go from there.
Okay. There it is.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Julie. We're going to talk about Pigeon Point. So this is where it is. I think we know where the context is by now. In some ways, though, Pigeon Point feels like a gateway to West Seattle, especially as one will be coming off this fabulous new bridge and turning the corner at Pigeon Point just before entering Delridge Station. The construction impacts here will also be very visible to travelers going across the West Seattle Bridge, so we realize its importance.
Please.
There have been lots of meetings specific to Pigeon Point, with more to come with these groups. We realize it's an important section of the project to understand, with complex issues of culture, connections, ecology, and views. And we are taking the time to understand these issues as best we can. So there is much evidence of a strong connection to the Greenbelt and neighborhood identity with Pigeon Point, including the community-built bust of Ralph Nesland, who has a colorful past. So Pigeon Point is the north end of the West Duwamish Greenbelt. It has heavily canopied steep slopes. It's primarily deciduous trees with prevalent invasive species, particularly English ivy and Himalayan blackberry. It also provides animal habitat, including heron nest trees. And we'll zoom in a little bit on the northeast section of Pigeon Point. So the red dots on the map to the left are locations of heron nest trees. We've been monitoring the heron rookeries for the last 4 years, and we'll continue to do so throughout construction. A reminder that the blue dash line on this map outlines the Seattle Parks property. SDOT also owns portions of Pigeon Point. The red boundary you see on the map in the red cloud is a 197-foot buffer that's established around the nesting trees. So let's talk a little bit about the bike routes and bike trails. The existing bike paths will be impacted. Some of them will be impacted at construction. Sound Transit has worked with SDOT to make improvements and modifications to allow safe bike movements during construction closures. The improvements made for construction detours will be permanent and will continue to be available to path users after construction. The photos on the right illustrate some existing conditions on the Del Ridge Connector Trail. Note the low ceiling at photo location B. This will be mentioned a little bit later when we discuss some of the restoration concepts. So looking at the proposed bike routes, all the paths that are temporarily closed for construction will be restored and reopened in essentially the same locations. The trail under the new guideway that's shown a little bit to the left on the slide will be shifted west just slightly to avoid the structure. And there'll be a new signalized crossing to the station on Del Ridge Way, pointed out at the bottom left of the slide. Let's talk a little bit about the concepts for the restoration of Pigeon Point. So we've developed 3 restoration concepts for consideration, building upon the engineering baseline that's needed for slope stabilization. All the concepts involve retaining walls to allow more trees to be planted on the slope, but the walls differ in quantity, height, and configuration. Note that these are very preliminary concepts and the design will progress as we move through the process. So let's explore the trail concept in more detail, the one on the right, to get a feel for what that could be like. A bit about the setting, as mentioned before, the Pigeon Point is the northern end of the West Duwamish Greenbelt. The West Duwamish Greenbelt enjoys a nice network of existing trails, and Pigeon Point could provide additional connections to these trails. So this is our first draft of a concept for creating trail connections at Pigeon Point. So some of the components of this concept include an overlook promenade at the top of the hill, kind of near the A section line there. Overlapping terraces to create spaces for tree groves, and a connection between the overlook and the trail at the bottom of the hill, shown in that sort of orange line that switchbacks down the hill. So this is not a finished concept, and we invite your input as part of this. I also need to note that Sound Transit is better suited to running a transit system than we are in managing recreational lands. And any development, we would look forward to working with Seattle Parks and/or SDOT to help design, manage, and maintain a new park here. So let's look at 3 sections labeled A, B, and C on this plan. So A would be the furthest one to the east, working our way west. So I want to emphasize that these are not engineering drawings. There's much to be worked out as part of these designs. Section A is the furthest east, just before the guideway touches the ground, and we're looking west at this section. So some of the things I just want to point out, the construction limits, both on the north and south end of the section, left and right part of the sections are the dark dashed vertical lines. The existing bike paths are shown sort of below in the lower left. The existing grade, I want to point that out, is that light dashed line. And as you can see, as it kind of moves up the hill and showing the 3 terraces that would be created through this, that there's not a lot of vertical grading at this point in the on the slope. And it shows sort of more forest. So it shows the 2 gravel paths that would be part of that snaking trail down the hillside, and more forest restoration on the lower slope. The photo on the bottom right is an example of retaining walls using some Core-10 steel that is used a lot lately because it rusts to a nice neutral color and doesn't need a lot of maintenance. But of course, materials have not yet been selected. And the loose sketch on the top right illustrates the overlapping terrace concept. So section B, the middle section, shows the condition where the guideway touches the ground and is at grade. And in this case, at this point, at the same elevation at the West Seattle Bridge. So again, the dark vertical lines are construction limits, and they are a little bit closer into the guideway here at the edge of the West Seattle Bridge. There's a lot more of the hillside will be removed at this point. As you can see, the existing grade kind of goes way up and above where the finished grade would occur. At this point, the new development would really not be visible, be less visible from the bike paths due to the topography and that ceiling of the West Seattle Bridge that you saw earlier. Photos at the top right illustrate some of the landscape concepts that could be explored through planting design. And then section C is a little further west. The guideway is still on grade at this point, but there is more room for planting between the guideway and the bridge on-ramp, which is slightly below track level at this point. We can see the amount of grading that would go on at this point, how much of that hillside would be removed. There's also more space above the guideway here, so terraces could be wider with more trees on the terraces. Slopes would ideally be no steeper than 4:1 horizontal to vertical. And here the photos on the top right show a couple of wall treatments that could be used. Obviously, they feel very different and provide a good start for our discussions. Here's another look at that preliminary sketch illustrating the potential trail hillside concept. And with that, this part of the presentation and invite your comments and questions.
Okay, so Molly, you've got a list of categories you're going to ask for input.
Absolutely. So this will be the questions round, remember. So those will be the questions directly to the presenters, and we'll do comments afterwards in conversation with each other. So the first one for questions is going to be around aesthetics.
Commissioner, just briefly, we've not been intentional or called out public comment. I don't believe that anyone from the public is attending today. When we're done with questions and before deliberation, let's have one last check. So if there are members of the public who are attending or listening, if you want to provide up to 2 minutes of public comment and you're attending virtually, just raise your hand and we'll recognize you before they start deliberation after this round. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, does anyone have any questions about aesthetics?
I think it's a question about aesthetics, but I'm just curious on the Corten or the weathering steel. Is there any way to kind of remove graffiti from that if it gets tagged? Is there any? Yeah, I know the gray concrete, like the S-Dot concrete, is painted over with gray. I'm just curious what graffiti mitigation there might be.
It's possible to remove graffiti. You have to kind of put a muriatic acid treatment on it so the rust regrows on it, and there may be some shadowing like there is on any surface. It's possible, but I think a bigger question is who's going to do it and whose property this ultimately is.
Okay.
But that question of how do we mitigate and maintain this space is a big one.
Okay. That's it for me then.
I'm interested, I know when you first brought up the hillside that there were 4 different options, but we really only focused on trail. Is that the preference? Is that the only one being considered? Or why bring up 4 options and then only talk about one of them, I guess is a question.
Yeah, I have not heard a preference yet. There has been some leaning that we've heard that the terrace option is preferred rather than the baseline engineering option, so that there are opportunities to bring more trees back in. But no, there hasn't been a decision on the trail concept. We presented that one just as a way to show some little more detail in the sections and how it might impact the hillside there.
Okay. And then you said that these sections were rather light on engineering. I appreciate that. how much do you think the engineering will impact that choice making? Because I imagine there's going to be fundamental cost differences between those, and I think Dirk is excited to answer this question.
I just, your first question, yeah, I mean, there is 4 options. I think the city, you've seen the baseline that we presented, so, right? And so, there's always been a discussion with the city about terracing versus the baseline option. Just didn't, but when you go to the terracing, the engineering of the terracing is, it's going to require analyses and structural engineering, and a lot of things will go into that to see how the terracing in actuality will work in that natural environment, right? And so some of that could dictate at the end of the day how much path or how much trail you could have there. Is it really feasible for a trail, or do you have to go to an ecological, some of the other
Yes.
options? So we think all of those options are good options for treating that intervention there. But the final design of that slope will play into what ultimately, as a decision-making process, what would be the best functional use of that area.
Yeah.
So these are possibilities, but they will need more engineering. So we're a little cautious about what is feasible.
So this is labeled trail hillside concept, but it includes terraces. But what you're telling us is this is your baseline.
No, all of them, we will do terracing. We will do terracing. However, how the terracing ultimately are dimensioned and fit within the slope that remains is a creative process, right? That's going to require engineering and design.
And engagement and input from
Right,
multiple
right,
parties,
right.
including.
So what we can say is that one wall has been eliminated as an option.
Baseline is eliminated as an option, right? Because it's not acceptable.
And the one wall, the one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So this is one combination of terraces and trails that you're showing us.
correct.
But it's just, it's very, very preliminary
And there's more work to be done, yeah.
And I would say there's a significant amount of engineering involved in this. An unstable, large hillside is no small feat to retain. And
Is it unstable?
it's
Well, we've done a global stability analysis, so we wouldn't put our trains here if we didn't have the confidence that we can put it there. But once you start making terracing, you still, that's a different global stability than if you just had that baseline slope, right?
Yes.
Because now locally you may have instability and so forth. So it's complex. It's going to require complex analyses, and then the design there's probably going to be multiple ways of you can solve that problem, which will lead to a different solution in terms of the terracing. But that's a bit of a process. We would, like we've done with the bridge, we would come to subcommittee and show progress and try to get feedback.
So,
we had a hand up in the contribution.
From the city's perspective, I think it's important just to note a couple things, and Dirk spoke and alluded to the multiple years of work doing this country regarding geotechnical concerns in that location. This site is, in addition to being part of it, is potential and known inside area along the corridor. There's multiple regulations that are in play from environmentally critical areas ordinance. Whatever work is done here will have to achieve complete stabilization both during construction and in final design. And that's what they're alluding to, that they've studied that with a baseline, but they need to do that work with a terrace option. And the city would need to participate in that to confirm that is in fact something that can be permitted. In addition to considering the trails as a design element for Vision Point, it also should be noted that because this is a regular corridor and wetland and the haven in this location, that it is absolutely critical and requirement of the code that ecological function be replaced on site in this location. what that is going to mean is that there's going to need to be a reforestation of this location, probably not at the same scale as what currently exists there, but at least the ecological function replaced. And so that will also be balanced with any public spaces that can be on the site. Those are all data points that are going to inform the final design, but when you're deliberating on it, suggesting, what should be considered as a factor to be incorporated into that final design. So ultimately, I think.
Can I ask a couple questions? So Mark, on your first section, section A, I don't see a dotted hillside. Is that because the hillside's intact there, at the top of the hill? Or is it the thought anymore?
So we're still elevated there.
Yeah, let me go back and find that section.
Just where the person is.
Yeah, you can kind of see it.
Want me to share it?
Yeah, I have to go back and forth if you want to.
Yeah.
share it.
I got it. I'm on it.
Thank
And
you.
then,
Yeah.
usually when you've got it up, if someone can show us where the estimate of how close the nearest house or structure is to that dotted line.
Okay.
So it doesn't see, I don't see the hillside carved away there at all,
So it's just barely carved away on those terraces.
on that one. Okay.
Yeah, on this one.
And then where would your arrow, how far off the page do you think you are before you're?
Well, let's go back to the plan and see if we can.
Yeah.
So this section A is here,
Take it all out.
and the last terrace shown on that section cut is here, and then this is the building here. And I don't have a dimension on that, but there you go. It's that.
It's a residential structure.
Right, but if you go back to the section, can you guess, do you think?
I think it's gonna be off the page a
Off the
little
page,
bit.
okay.
Yeah.
And then let's just keep doing that for B and C too.
Okay. All right. So we'll go, whoops. Okay.
And Julie, when you say structure, these are all residential structures. and
I believe so. That's a
Yeah.
residential structure up there.
That's helpful.
Okay. And then, so section B, so here's our cut and the construction limits line. And then we'll jump back to the plan and B. Looks like there's a terrace and then
The
there's.
top thing.
a
But these
little-
are the houses that remain. So
That's
that
correct.
in your section, you have an area that's called private parcel. And that is your land take.
Yeah, right. That would be the property, but.
Right, so if you go back to section B,
Mhm. Oh, to the, yeah.
this is what Brian's talking about, is that there's something labeled private property, but it's probably not still private property. when you
No.
build this. That's.
Right, correct.
And
Oh,
so the
yeah.
first house is probably, it might be, that house is close enough, it might be on the page still.
Well, there's one that's taken there as well. There's a removed.
Yes.
Okay.
And then by the third one, it looked like to the section that it's pretty open.
And then going back to the plan, section C, yeah, there's enough property,
Yeah, that didn't.
properties that, yeah, get impacted that.
Which I have some questions about that.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, are we comfortable on aesthetics? We're going to move to questions about circulation.
We got aesthetic circulation. What are those?
Aesthetics, circulation, alternative preference, sustainability, outreach and equity, and special information needed for 30%. Are we okay on aesthetics?
Can I ask one aesthetic thing that we didn't touch?
Go ahead.
This is where the long span bridge meets the ground essentially, right? And we had a previous, how do those two interface structures conversation from this morning? I think we probably have that same comment here.
Yeah, I think that's a good
It's just-
question.
Let's see the transition from the bridge to the not bridge.
And is that a 30%? Is that a question for the team from what we're looking at today?
I think it's just as it evolves.
Well, isn't it a question too, is it visible?
Great question.
Are you asking the question?
Yeah, with the long distance bridge in here.
There's a long span on between the needle, the cable stay and the slab, the slab is is that blue?
This blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Slab on
So,
grade.
right, so there's a long span going towards towards the cable stay, and that long span will be treated similarly like the other long spans that we explained previously. And there may be some detailing that you may want to see in how we transition there. We don't have that, I think, but we can provide that when we have that, follow-up discussion on those transitions. On the other side, we have to go across Del Ridge, and we go across Del Ridge with a longer than typical span. I think it's about 170, so we're stretching it, but that will be an I-girder bridge. That's how we envision it, just sort of more typical, and then that runs into the station. So you'll see, columns that we have under our station. So we probably can show that in the Del Ridge when we come back to Del Ridge, but,
Great. The next one is circulation. Do people have questions about circulation?
We're the bike piece. I know that.
Any questions on circulation?
I think it's not resolved enough to really ask any real questions about circulation. Is that accurate? Because they're not actually proposing that exact route for the trail, right? It's just kind of an idea.
In the discussion section, we'll talk about circulation, what we would hope to see, what concerns we have as it's developed further.
You're talking human circulation rather than train circulation.
Correct. Bike and head circulation.
And, we want those, just to the extent that they can be left intact as much as possible during inspection.
Or routed in a way that provides access.
Yeah. I feel like that was what was important.
I'd say that, I'm leaning towards more to the train circulation, but it seems like we're creating this area between two major infrastructures again. Train and the elevated highway. And those two are leaving behind little triangles of zones. And I guess one of my questions is it more possible to marry the guideway path with the West Seattle Bridge and put those together and leave more natural on the hillside than nature train, nature highway? Don't cut the corner and leave part of nature between these two infrastructure things.
So do we have a question that we feel like can answer at this moment in time, or do you want to continue with that discussion?
Do you want to ask why there's this?
If that's been considered, what's making it fall in that location?
I'm a little.
I think there's a required distance on the West Seattle Bridge, just required by the city. Not those things where we're line.
Can we maintain that distance?
What's that?
twice.
That's the question. So what has driven the distance between your bridge, your guideway, and the existing West Seattle Bridge?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things determine that. The location of the station of Del Ridge Station, and it has gone through a number of iterations, but ultimately it landed where it is today. And we can't really follow. I mean, we've darkened the lines a little bit on this slide, right? That shows the West Seattle Bridge now, or the outlines of the West Seattle Bridge. If you see where the slab gets very close to the West Seattle Bridge, if you kept following that line, you would have to come across with a different curve. You go over the fire station that's across on the other side. The curve doesn't meet our requirements. And there's a number of aspects to why we are there.
The curve radii is the problem.
One of them, right.
Yeah, and
when we were out there walking and looking at all the infrastructure that's there now, it is disappointing that there isn't a way to make it all just one new thing. And so accepting the reality that this is a bridge being added next to, this is a huge concrete infrastructure being added to already existing concrete infrastructure. I think we have to start with that that's just a given. We don't get to go back in time on that. So. It's a challenge.
But aren't you saying what is the relative value of the area, the land, the natural area between the two? Because it isn't a natural barrier. What do you do to make the area to the south more valuable than and what's going on with that remnant and what's the relative value to the public?
Yeah,
I think that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I think it's consistent with the previous comment is that we're leaving behind slivers. And is there a good way to not do that? Or is there a better use of that sliver?
But I don't think that's a question. We're not, that's like a discussion maybe, or are we asking them the question?
So Dirk just gave us the answers to my question.
Yes, I think that.
Okay,
You should move on.
great, and we can discuss it. My only other one would be, circulation related, would be at that intersection of the potential trail connection and the bike. There's the potential public realm improvements. Has there been any specific thinking about what that would entail?
is Darren on the call?
Darren, are you here?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Of course I am. Could you repeat that question for me?
Yeah, so at the intersection of that potential trail connection that would climb the eastern portion of Pigeon Point and the bike trail once it's reinstituted after construction, that those public realm improvements that are highlighted in as yellow, is there any specificity about that you could share?
No, because, well, I mean, I think it really does depend. The engineering will help inform what kind of can happen in there. I think we see it as an opportunity. How it manifests once we dig into the design of it more will help define it.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
yeah, that's why it's kind of fuzzy.
Great.
Great.
Can we
Look forward
expand
to
it?
looking closer at that in 30%.
Yeah. I'll raise my hand then. In that area where you see the yellow, I just want to bring this to your attention because it's not very clear on this. But in that area where that yellow highlight is, and I believe that's what you were speaking on, you see some gray there. And, you know, there's an area there. Yeah, right there. There's an area there where we are providing access for SDOT to the West Seattle Bridge. Just as an FYI. So it's a functional need there. We have to do that. So regardless of, and then I think in the other slides we showed earlier, there is more green space, right? Surplus space that's green. That's on the other side. Yeah.
Opportunities.
Yeah, the opportunity side. So you don't see that here, but.
Okay. Do we have any, I already heard some questions about alternative preference. Any other questions about alternative preference? So you had mentioned, Julie, that that the terraces and trail are two of the goals, and that, can you confirm whether the one wall alternative, whether that one is, I guess the question would be, just to clarify what you said earlier, are the trail and terrace the goal? Have any of those other than the baseline been knocked off the table? Has the one wall option been knocked off of the table?
In my mind, the one wall has been knocked off the table because of feedback from stakeholders, from the city staff, and that sort of thing. The preference that we've heard has been for this terrace concept that allows for a more integrated planting, vegetation, tree ecosystem
Yeah, multiple.
And to de-emphasize the visual impact of a one big wall.
Great. So the tip,
I think we've asked questions.
great. Okay, any other questions on that one? We'll move to sustainability questions. Okay. I do have a sustainability question. So what we're seeing now is all cut and fill. Is there a strategy for cut and fill, understanding that there are further studies on how you would manage that fill and how the terracing could be made possible?
We've asked a lot of questions about what to do with the cut and fill. We haven't gone through any solutions or idea, obviously there's other green locations in this area that you maybe could use some fill. There's places in Delridge, where the station is, where there's potential, but the material we're taking out here is not necessarily great material. It's a hard mix to work with if you wanted to, maybe if you have to fill a very big hole, yeah, maybe this material is useful, but when you just, raise surfaces for contouring and things like that, the material may not necessarily be acceptable. But we are very aware of it, and we want to be sustainable. We don't necessarily want to truck it out if we don't have to.
Yep, that's my question. Okay, and then outreach and equity questions, unless anyone had another question on sustainability.
I just had one question, maybe too early, Barbara. Sorry to put you on the spot again. But I was talking about the terrace or trail options. You mentioned in the past presentation about a desire for ground plane activation. So I'm just curious if there has been consideration about activation in this terracing with artwork.
Well, I would say that the team has really been interested in what the regreening of this could be, and to make sure that this perception that it's a green hill that everyone has as you go around can be, if not recreated, it can be respected in the future, and that it can be planned for to have a nice frame as it comes around. So there will be some terracing of what kind of material we don't know, and it's come up that we could at least do a form liner treatment on that, but it would hopefully be an interim kind of expression that would be thrown over with bigger trees and shrubbery. So because of that, I mean, the goal is landscaping here to make it really appealing in a new way. That I don't know that that's the prime place for the artwork budget, but it may be some art thinking that can go into that.
In terms of outreach, I'm wondering if you're hearing specific things from some of those single family homes. And if some of that might be compatible with or in conflict with the bigger neighborhood outreach. For instance, views and trees and heights and use and privacy and all that. If in the outreach, there's been any balancing of that.
I don't know if you can speak to that or.
I can share some. We don't have like summarized all of the record for that. I can share what I heard during some property owners outreach or like, with the community as well. So big themes that we heard, property owners mostly, of course, they really care about the aesthetic, and also they're aware that the slope for this neighborhood and also the technical challenges in this area. But I think the vegetation is something that they really want to keep. And also property has most concerns that they have when we interact with them. For other community engagement, for example, we recently met with First Connects organizations. They are very interested about how we treatment of the parent. So these are the interests in their mind. But we haven't shared a lot of details, all those early concepts because it's not ready yet. But we show some graphics in our station plan. But haven't heard a lot of questions about all this stuff, because we have so much information. Basically, that's what I heard. I can speak for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions on outreach and equity? Okay. Do we have any questions related to what we need for the 30% review? I think we'll just discuss that component. Okay. Great. And at that, Jill, I'll transition us to discussion.
Absolutely.
All right.
And just to be clear, no hands raised
No hands raised, okay.
about members of the public wanting to comment, so soldier on.
Yeah. We haven't made space for city staff comments either, so I assume I don't think anybody's going to do that.
I would think that there would be hand raised. They're very happy to do that. I'm not sure that there are any.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let's start discussion on aesthetic. Continue discussion on aesthetic. Okay, so I'll start us with the terrace and trail options. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I like the trail option, and a lot of things, it could feel really great. I like the images. I think there's some pictures earlier on that they showed. I think it's early in the slide deck. I just think that could be a really nice benefit. So sounds like the right decision. My perspective, that's what would be my preferred solution.
I think I'd agree in terms of sort of more natural, more organic. I think we have to recognize that terraces will create a barrier from people going up and down the hill. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing. And the trail creates an ability to walk from the low levels up into the neighborhood. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe that's a bad thing, right? And I'm sure different stakeholders will have comments on that. I think the engineering of this is going to govern what's possible. Honestly, there's really deep foundations on some of these walls, lots of tiebacks. It will very much change the materiality of it. I think Core 10 would probably just be an application onto the wall rather than the wall itself, just in terms of, in terms of overall load. So I don't see that do it. And I really appreciated the comment that we actually want this to grow back as trees rather than be a wall. So maybe the materiality of the wall doesn't matter as much. To me, there's a couple of those big choices, but I think the engineering is going to really play into the feasibility. These sections are very diagrammatic. The walls are much more significant than this.
Yeah, I mean, I think we take this as aspirational, and I think from an aspirational perspective, the balance of the vegetation, and there is a trail at the A section that does come from the bottom. There is a way. So I think aspirationally they've got their arms around the right things. How it's going to shake out is what we have to just keep track of as it evolves.
Yeah, and I appreciate that what's being shown is the trail option, but it's really this combination of a trail option and the terracing approach. And we're seeing those two things on portions. And so I think we have to acknowledge that if it's accessible, then there will need to be some parks commitment to maintenance of those spaces. And so I'm looking forward to seeing which of these areas can be reforested in a way that isn't constantly maintained, and or that's being, really thinking about who is maintaining it, are the strategies appropriate to who's maintaining it as we're going into 30% will be really helpful. I think that connection is a really important one, if it's possible, as Dirk was saying. So my hope would be just continuing to study these terraces as an ecological approach and reforestation approach, trail as a desire line that we know, but that who will maintain it is a huge part of the success.
Yeah.
I mean, I have as the special information, your last category is resolving ownership.
Mhm.
Because it seems like the reality of the engineering and then working backwards from the resolving of the ownership are the two things that have to meet as they get further into design.
And just for the record, there is a huge body of work that we learned from the 520 team about those walls and how they can be customized for the inclusion of natural features that will grow concurrently. There are lessons that might be applied here.
Yeah, and I think just for 30%, I think all the diagrams so far are great just for understanding, just what's going on. But I think we do need to see a lot of like ground level, like what people actually see when they use the proposed space, however it starts shaking out, So I think like from the car view of what the hillside looks like if you're on the bridge, and then how a user actually experiences things, just perspective sketches at 30% would be really important.
And I think that also includes, so you have pedestrians from multiple perspectives, you have vehicles, and then you also have from those bike paths. So as the design develops, am I seeing any of these impacts? The current sections, really you're seeing the existing condition come down to the bike. And so as the terrace options are further studied, what happens for that new bike location? Is it exactly the same, or are there changes that are visible to bikes as well?
And at 60 miles an hour on a curve, there may be some very clear thoughts about what you don't want to see. When you're driving that curve, some traffic concerns about what that isn't contributing to the experience.
Essentially like how it's open, how the bike is open during construction, and is it still, it's pretty important connection to West Seattle, so it's being rerouted.
And it looked like that route to the north of the street during construction. So there's those few parallel tracks on either side. That's my understanding. Is that everyone else's understanding?
Yes.
So you cross.
Totally with you.
You cross to the west and you're on the north side. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then you reconnect. Okay, anything else on aesthetics? We'll move into circulation if not.
For the aesthetics too, with mention about the pedestrian experience, just to comment that, when we walked it really currently is a place that's much more designed for bicyclists than pedestrians. And so this does seem to provide a potential future enrichment for the pedestrian experience that doesn't exist now. I'm curious with seeing if there's a way with showing visualizations with thinking about how this space will change over time, to Barbara's point about wanting the regreening of this contour. What type of trees are going back in? There's a lot of big leaf maple at this location. So I'm just curious about like the typology of what would this look like, in 30 years with what's being put in place right now, for kind of that general goal, and will that be possible with the planting?
And I can put that in our, in what we want to see in 30% is the initial aesthetics of the plantings. And I think that also goes to something that I didn't ask questions about now in sustainability, but I'm sure that we will in 30%, which is what is that planting strategy as it pertains to resilience, climate adaptive plantings. And so really understanding what is the planting palette that you're bringing back when you're taking off this existing planting palette, moving to climate that's changing. What's the appropriate planting palette for that area? Okay, any other thoughts on aesthetics before we move to circulation? I do want to clarify actually one thing with you all. So what I heard was the support for the reforestation and the naturalization. And I heard that the desire for the walls is that the walls are supportive of that naturalization strategy. Is that accurate to what you all want to see from the walls? Is there anything else you want to say about what you would hope to see from the walls in the terracing option?
When you say naturalization strategy, what do you mean by that?
So the reforestation, and then I heard Michael mentioned, walls that can help with that regrowth versus we talked about core 10. I just wanted to tease out exactly what we mean by, is it reforesting the landscape? And then the wall itself is an architectural expression. Do the walls blend into it? Are we just excited to see at 30% what the strategy is around that?
I think for me, I would just want to see what the strategy is. It seems like if we're going to sort of reinforce it in those images that were shown earlier on, the pathways through the trees feel very natural. So I would say that the wall should be like, I don't want this to be taken too far, but like just kind of go away as much as possible so that they're not like a big expression with some sort of thing. I think core 10 actually, whether it's steel or whatever, is pretty soft kind of material to go into like a forested or a natural habitat. It feels like it kind of goes away versus, I don't know, like a rockery.
I mean, to me, it's a confirmation of that those two things are true, right? Like if we're going to reforest and not see the walls, then the walls are not as important typology, like aesthetically.
Yeah.
As long as we get those trees. If we end up not getting those trees, then the walls become very prominent and very important. And so to me, confirmation of trees equals less concern.
The emphasis of walls.
Which I think goes back to your point of the introduction of another major concrete structure in this location. We already have that occurring in this. So
Yeah.
having the wall recede as much as possible
Would be
materially is the goal.
Great. Okay, we'll move into circulation.
For me, I would just like to see what and then, I know there's like a conversation with parks, or I just like to kind of understand what the circulation path is. I don't think that this is actually the proposal necessarily. It's just like it's just an idea of like connecting 2 points, right? So I think it's just more information on it.
Okay, so confirmation with parks, so that goes into what we want to see for 30% in general is this split between agencies resolving ownership component. Is there anything on what I did here on the last one is that we want to see the views from bike and ped perspectives.
One of the ideas that I'd like to see is if this is a set of trails that are prompted from the introduction of mass transit, is there a way that those trails can go to the mass transit so that people can access it from Delridge Station and then go on a nice little urban hike or something, right? Like it's.
Yeah, it's already a really active biking area, so it's the introduction of the pedestrian experience that's newer with this, and that's like that experience is the area that I have the most questions about. Also from a safety perspective, having lived in areas where there are introduced pedestrian trails amongst like a really busy area, and if you're being kind of protected on one side with the hard surface, what's the noise experience like for somebody? Lighting is something for later on, but just curious about kind of what that feels like from like a sensory perspective for someone who's, and a safety perspective for someone who's walking as compared to biking in an area like this.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see whether, so if you were walking through this area, if you're coming from, say, Delridge Station, as you were mentioning, Brian, connecting to the transit itself, there are those stair connections on the western side of Pigeon Point that could then bring you up to these overlooks. Love it. And so I'm just trying to think how your pedestrians would likely move through this space.
I think that's my question.
Station up, and then would I go back down?
If we are making trails, let's make them trails to something.
To motivate.
rather
movement.
than just a trail from under a bridge to the top of a hill. I think that would probably be the least interesting trail.
And I think it matters what those larger parcels against the Duwamish end up being as well. So if that lighter green becomes, if you have some sort of stewardship of that space or community involvement and you end up with some sort of open space in that area, then you have a trail to something, right? And you're connecting to the whole trail network that Pigeon Point ends up connecting to. Okay, do we have any specific recommendations associated with that?
It's
Maybe just explore the potentials.
Show the tie-ins.
just further evolution.
Explore potential.
For
Making it a
broad
destination and.
And the connections to Delridge Station could be something that's presented to us with Delridge Station. So understanding how I could connect from Delridge Station over to these areas is something I would hope to see with Delridge Station. Because we will be looking, what are the connections over to Longfellow Creek and the community spaces on that side? And then what are the connections over to Pigeon Point from Delridge? All right, anything else on circulation?
That's good.
Great. Okay, our next one is alternative preference. We did some discussion about that one already. And what I heard was that we like the terracing component, the potential for reforestation. And we like the idea of the trail if the trail is possible. And we want to understand how the trail can connect to things more broadly. Anything else? Great. All right, sustainability. We talked a little bit about cut and fill strategy.
I'd like to know where all the trees are going. It's going to be
Yeah, we're just effectively logging this area. What can we do with that?
and what creative uses. The zoo is always interested in sort of big trees for the girls to play with, and there's a lot of interesting things happening down there. Rather than just chucking it all.
And that's
Yeah,
100%.
Just something I think we should just touch base on throughout.
I think at 30%, it would be useful to share that as something that we're interested in is where are the trees going? Are there opportunities to share those trees with others in the city who want them? Are there opportunities for nurse logs on site? So how can we do reforestation in a way that feels like true and natural reforestation?
Or if we can.
But that's just in addition to the other things involved in tracking that.
Okay, so tracking both tree material and then understanding in the next phase cut and fill strategy as well. And then when we're doing reforestation, wanting to know about what are the climate resilient tree species approaches. So what are the climate adaptive tree species considerations? Okay, anything else on sustainability? Okay, so understanding how the Envision certification overlays with this area would be great as we know more in 30% design, just continue to track how that tracks with your Envision certification would be great. All right, outreach and equity.
You guys have stuff already?
I have two questions about whether there would be art in the terrace walls, which was really the focus more so on the Green Hill experience. And then you asked about the outreach to single family homes. So was there anything?
Yeah, and from an equity perspective, how you balance that with making more access for the larger community. you know, we've
Maybe like
encountered this
trail
all the time.
access or-
It's the Bitter Lake conversation we had too. Yes, you've got single family owners, you have to you have to have some privacy and protection, but how do you balance that against being able to do just what you talked about, having walking paths for the first time,
Mhm.
where you can walk without maybe getting run over by a bike. So
Mhm.
so that's part of outreach and equity both, both sides.
I would be interested in, and this one may end up being more associated with the bridge or more associated with Pigeon Point, but really understanding how some of the ongoing outreach, particularly to federally recognized and non-federally recognized tribes, how that impacts the areas on the edge of the Duwamish that are nearby
Yeah.
this area. That comes into how the trails are utilized. I think those potential destinations, if they happen, if those are coordinated with others, would fit into the question of how this project is responding to some of that tribal engagement goals. Kate, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree, and it'd be great to be kept apprised of those conversations for those parcels where to be determined what their future is.
Okay. All right, anything else on outreach and equity before we talk about special information needed for 30%?
That's
Great.
much for
I think there was a little bit of a conversation during Q&A about the long span sections on either side of Pigeon Point. And that was only in the Q&A.
Let's put that in aesthetic. So long
Yeah.
span. So that's really about the family of guided homes.
I think,
Just the transition from,
Transition.
yeah, west of Pigeon Point, you have one typology for the rest of the way. That side makes sense. Right, Delaware Station, all of that elevated is going to be the same columns, the same spanning. It's east of this touchdown. A little bit of box girder and then a long span bridge, and then it's really part of that Soto language.
Okay, so those to the east as it transitions to the bridge itself. I would add, in addition to that, that when we look at the Delridge station, because that where you're going underneath the guideway along Delridge Way, because that is a gateway to Delridge, I would ask that during the Delridge review, we look more in depth at the aesthetic of the columns in that area as well.
Is there a way to define the interface of these two things that we've looked at as from Soto Station all the way till you touch this ground is one thing that we look at?
From a structures, was that?
Are you, can you restate the question, please? We're a little fuzzy here.
I feel like we looked at something this morning and then we're looking at something now.
Mhm.
And the interface between those two things is up in the air,
Mhm.
right? And the natural interface between what we're looking at is aesthetics, is the entire length until the blue area where you're at grade.
Mhm. So you're asking about seeing all the elements. I think we can make
Just
that.
go from Soto at grade
Yeah,
to Pigeon Point at grade, and then consider that one
one design piece or.
design piece for aesthetic review, because that is a continuation of the same span. And then I think the Delridge stuff is all within the Delridge side. And this Pigeon Point, for us, is mainly about the walls and the trails and the nature. But those two structures are, their interface line is at the blue at grade location.
Sure. So I think what you're asking for is just to look at it holistically, all that elevated piece, all those elevated pieces, look at it as one piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we could probably orchestrate that for next year.
So Molly's gonna wrap this up. And while she's doing that, do you have any clarifying questions for us?
I don't personally, but Dirk or Mark, do you have any clarifying questions for them based on what you've heard?
Nope, I do not.
Okay.
Okay.
The only,
Go ahead, Kurt.
the only, just like you were saying, can you connect, for the structures and you look at that one thing? Maybe with this discussion on all this green stuff, maybe we should expand this view a little bit because there seems to be a lot of about trail connections to this and trail connections to that. So this is too isolated to discuss that. So maybe that expanding that view for that purpose.
It seems like there's looking at all the structure as structure and how is the design of the structure working. And then there's what is everything else around it designed as. And so I think, a little more holistic view of what all the structural pieces are. And then we can, continue to dive into what the spaces around the structures.
Yeah, because I think the urban design of the parks or the trails or the people pedestrian movement around that infrastructure is one tied together thing as well. Yeah. That's great.
Molly, what you got?
All right, so.
That's an action for us to take.
Okay, so we would like to, I hope, approve the preliminary engineering phase for the Pigeon Point segment. I did not hear any conditions on that. So we'll only be looking at recommendations. I do want to say that there's a lot of support for some of the aspects of the design that include the choice of the terracing and the trail if trail is possible. There's a lot of support for the reforestation component and naturalization of that, the emphasis on that regreening and reforestation over other aesthetic components. Other things we're particularly excited about? There are quite a few. Okay, so then I'll go into recommendations. So recommendations were around aesthetics. So again, support for the terraces and trail, reforestation support, a desire to look at a family of guideway columns and the transitions and to look at that all the way from the Soto station to where it engages with Pigeon Point and to separately look at the guideway structures and columns associated with Delridge and up to Avalon as their own component. And for those to tell a cohesive story as a cohesive family that transitions in a cohesive way as the design team moves forward.
You might want to call out, including the connection of the west side to the village nation.
From Pigeon Point. Yes, so the crossover to the Delridge station from Pigeon Point, because it serves as a gateway to Delridge, and that is also something we're particularly interested in reviewing alongside the Delridge station. Regarding circulation, our recommendation would be confirmation with the Parks Department, confirmation of ownership and of maintenance. We would want to see views from the bike and pedestrian perspectives as the design continues to evolve, and to understand how the pedestrian network knits into a broader pedestrian network, including the destinations, because you know more about those surrounding destinations. We also want to explore the, I just said that, broader network of trails. And then again, request that Delridge connections to Pigeon Point are included in that consideration. Again, alternatives preference, that terraces with reforestation, the trail if possible, and the trail connections more broadly that would connect to that. From a sustainability perspective, again, the reforestation is a piece of that. And 30% will be interested in that cut and fill strategy as it evolves. And then understanding, in addition to where the earth is going, we'd be interested to hear what's happening with trees that are being removed from that area, including creative uses for that on site or elsewhere within the city. And then we would also want updates on how these components align with your envision goals. Outreach and equity, we're interested in a balancing of larger community access with some of the single family concerns. We're also interested in that Duwamish edge, the parcels at the Duwamish edge, any partnerships that can be established around those, and how the tribal engagement leads to solutions in those areas. That's also likely to overlap with the question of how the bridge meets the ground. Special information that we want for the 30% review would be resolving ownership, aesthetics of the planting and resilience of the plantings, wall strategies that aesthetically develop alongside the naturalization goals, the SOTO holistic family from edge to edge, we already said, as well as views from pedestrians, cars, and bikes as they move around Pigeon Point.
Great work.
We were busy.
A lot more. It was a lot more than I.
Let's go back. And the very first statement is you were asking us to approve.
So with all of those recommendations in mind, and no conditions.
Let's just raise our hand.
Approve, raise your hand if you approve. Great.
And now we have 53 minutes to fill in the missing piece, because we've done one side and the other, and now it's still crossing.
Yep. Roll right into it.
Yeah, just keep going. If you need to get up and walk around, that's fine, but we're gonna keep going.
There is coffee back there, but.
Oh.
There's coffee.
Hide it in the back.
No, there's only coffee over there. We're out.
Oh, we are.
Yeah, we are out.
No, there's coffee in that.
Yeah.
Over here.
What was that?
That was leftover from last time.
Oh, that's.
No, the outside the door.
Coffee never goes bad.
Okay, okay.
That's my rule.
Smell on the street.
Steel cup.
Well, we have to.
For sure.
Those are just how it works.
Yes.
You're gonna be right in.
Right in between.
What?
Between spare and.
Oh, yeah.
Elaborate. And fluff.
Their outlines have been somewhere in between the number.
Right.
Or I too sorry.
You know, Dirk